Okay, so welcome on this Wednesday evening where we're going to explore some of the basic fundamental philosophical pillars that support our practice and are evident in, at least in my experience, are fairly evident in Aikido and Aikido dojo culture. Now, I'm not an expert on these philosophical pillars, but they are fairly common in the practice of Aikido as well as in other Japanese martial arts. And I think it helps give a little bit of a context for the culture that we train in if we become more cognizant of these philosophical models that influence the way we train and the way we interact on the mat and in community. So the four models that I'm referring to are the fundamental ground for most of Japanese culture. And they are, the first is Shinto. The second is Buddhism. The third is Taoism. And the fourth is Confucianism, the teachings of Confucius. Now, O-sensei was influenced strongly by the new, at that time, this new spiritual movement known as Omoto Kyo. And I'm not referring to Omoto Kyo as being one of those pillars, as Omoto Kyo is, in a way, a variation of some of the ancient Shinto practices. And although that Shinto is not necessarily a codified philosophy, Omoto Kyo arose out of that tradition and arose out of that context. And we'll go over that a little bit more, but I'm including, Omoto Kyo is in a way included within the context of Shinto. Even though I think, and again, I'm not an expert on this, Omoto Kyo has had influences from the other three. Now, in fact, all four, Buddhism, Shinto, Confucianism, and Taoism, have greatly influenced each other in many different ways. And in certain times, they were kind of interdependent. And at other times, they were forcibly separated and almost with an antagonistic role with each other. So I don't necessarily want to go into the history of them, but I want to go into the kind of way they are felt or influenced in the way we train. So the three of them are fundamentally originated through Buddhism originating in India, translating through China into Japan. Taoism and Confucianism, specifically from my understanding, arose in China, and Japan was the birthplace of Shinto. Now, in regards to what we're looking at, let's see here. What we're looking at in how they influence Aikido, the influence can be felt differently in different dojos, in the sense that some dojos are highly influenced by the practice of Shintoism. Some dojos gravitate more towards a perspective of Taoism, some more towards a perspective of Buddhism, and a lot of dojos very influenced by the codification that has occurred in the practice or in the culture of Confucius teachings or Confucius theory. So let's go over them briefly so we get a taste of what we're talking about. And so let's begin with the most difficult one. I think probably the one which is least visible for most people. And that's the Confucian approach. Now, Confucius and the teachings that came with that particular approach in China was the model of creating harmony within a social structure, within society. It's how we relate to our parents, how we relate to our relatives, how we relate to our seniors, how we relate to our juniors, and how we create a society where everyone and everything is in its right place at the right time for the right reason. It's a model. It's modeling an attempt to model harmony within the social structure of humanity. And this gave the fundamental ground and the basic framework for the experience that we have with the senpai and the kohai relationship, and how the culture of Aikido is based on this harmonious modeling of everybody being honored for who they are and what they're doing. Where beginners are honored for who they are, seniors are honored for who they are, teachers are honored for who they are, and the whole framework is framed in a way that is meant to support every individual in the social structure. It's an attempt to create some form of harmonious hierarchy. Now, whether you agree with that as being healthy or unhealthy, that's another subject. But fundamentally, it's a very strong component of how we train in Aikido. And it replaces, in a way, it stands in contrast to a competitive model where whoever's the strongest gains the upper position of notoriety or seniority, and whoever's weakest, whoever's more successful is fundamentally more recognized. Somebody who's less successful is less recognized. But in this type of hierarchy, those people that have trained and committed and have put the work in, they are recognized for their seniority, for their position in the group, and they're honored in that way. Okay? And as they're honored in that way, irregardless to a certain extent of their skill, they are honored for their commitment to the art. They're honored for the time they put into it. They're honored as a way to recognize their place within the group. And this is a very important aspect of Aikido culture. Some dojos have this very strongly within their framework. Some are a little bit more casual and less framed in this way. But irregardless, Aikido culture is influenced very strongly by this attempt to create a hierarchy of harmony, where teachers and seniors are recognized and listened to, where senpai are seen as being people of value, and where kohai or juniors are people that are cared for, that are people that are supported, that people that are given their position, and where senpai are meant to be in this kind of big brother role, and kohai are meant to be in this little sister or little brother role, or this sibling type of relationship that creates this, attempts to create the harmony that could be found in a family unit. And so creating this kind of connection between members in a dojo, much like a family, where Aikido is attempting to honor a person's worth and a person's work through that modeling. Now, if you are focused on a Confucian perspective where the social unit and the social structure like a family is priority, that will change the way you train. That will have an influence on the way you train. If you're training with somebody who's senior, you are more inclined to listen, to recognize their seniority, follow the rhythm of the training, and if you train with a beginner, you are bringing them into new territory. You're introducing different types of things. So it has an influence on the way you train. It has an influence on the way you interact. And so this type of pillar, this type of philosophical perspective has a very strong impact on the way you approach the art. So just being cognizant of that domain can be very helpful, and understanding on where it comes from and how it is held in the dojo social context can be very, very important as you understand more of how Aikido is practiced and how Aikido is shared. Now, in relationship to Confucianism, we have the philosophical perspective of Shinto. Now, Shinto is translated in Japanese as the way of gods, or the way of the gods. Now, Shinto doesn't necessarily have a teaching per se, but a general fundamental theory that all things in nature have spirit. All things in nature are divine. And in Japan, it's a very animistic, almost shamanic type of approach to our relationship with nature, in the sense that I commune with those spirits of nature. I commune and connect with those spirits of nature, and I too am a spirit of nature. And one of the main themes of Shinto philosophy, Shinto approach, is the theme of misogi, of purification, of moving towards a greater, more divine experience of myself. Now, you can see that these types of philosophy, these types of perspectives have two natures to them. One is a realization, and the other is a transformational nature. A realization is seeing kind of the structure and the truth of what this philosophical perspective is portraying, as in a Confucian hierarchical system, where you see, yes, it's valuable to honor those who've gone before me, and it's valuable to care for those who come after me. And I have my place. I get it. Intellectually, I get it, and I want to practice it. Now, in Shinto, you get it. You may get, yes, nature is divine, but there's also a transformational nature in the Shinto practice. And that transformational nature is one of becoming actually like a force of nature in your body. It's literally embodying those divine forces of nature and making them part of who you are. So there's in the Shinto practices, specifically transformational practices, there'll be things like misogi practices, which are sitting under waterfalls, bathing in natural waters, doing deep breathing, doing chanting, and things like Kotodama, which is a subset spiritual practice, which in a way is included in more than just Shinto, but is part of Shinto. And Kotodama meaning the word of the spirit, Kotodama, is a very powerful subset practice in the world of Shinto. And it was something that O-sensei practiced quite a bit. And through the practice of chanting, through the practice of Masogi, through the practice of purification and training in a way that you are trying to access the actual life energy of nature and transform yourself into literally into a divine force, you become, you transform the experience of who you are at the level of the physical body. And Aikido was practiced in this way through O-sensei's approach in many different ways. The Shinto practice has a strong influence in Aikido, specifically in where I developed primarily my first dojo, which was in Iwama. The fabric of the Shinto perspective was very present and very tangible in the air of the dojo. And Masogi and this kind of intense engagement with life energy and practicing it with a lot of very physical, dynamic, energetic movement. It was a big part of the training in Iwama, and it was deeply connected with that sense of the Shinto culture. The exercises like Funakogi Undo, the rowing boat exercise, these are Shinto exercises. And they are meant to kind of transform the body into a divine host. And if you see behind me this Kamidana, this is a piece of Shinto culture. And it's meant to represent, Kamidana mean the spirit, the space where the spirit resides, or the shelf where the spirit resides. Is meant to represent our bodies in a way where we create our bodies to become literally Kamidanas, spirit, places where the spirit resides. And we develop this through the practice of Aikido and bringing this type of engagement with the divine nature found in life to a greater experience of ourselves. Now, when we practice with a partner, we're looking and engaging with our partner as a vital force, a vital life force. So a lot of contact, a lot of intensity, a lot of direct feeling, not of competition, but almost a sense of bringing these energies together in a way which purifies both people. So there's a sense of wanting to in a way strengthen by the fire, strengthen the body, strengthen the system through the fire and the intensity of the training. And this type of training feels different, very different, has a very intense quality to it, very dynamic quality to it. So the third pillar that I'll refer to now is the philosophical perspective of Taoism. And Taoism originates in China, and specifically with the teacher Lao Tzu and other teachers in that time period who really focused, similar to the Shinto nature, that they were connecting with the energies and the polar energies in the natural flow. And they were looking, and specifically looking to find the way to be in that state of flow, to be in that state of effortless flow with the world around, to discover how to be in a state of harmony, where that flow, where both sides are included in the movement, where the yin and the yang are recognized as being two aspects of one system, and connecting with the Tao, which is in Japanese translated as Do, or the way of life, which includes everything in a state of harmony. Now, the Tao Te Ching is probably the major text of this approach, and this approach has influenced Japanese culture very strongly, and Aikido incredibly strongly. And there are many teachers that I feel, in a way, are kind of physical Taoists in the way they approach their Aikido. And it's not the intensity of the purification of the misogi, but more of that discovery of a harmonious unity between self and other. And that sense of feeling of being on the path or in the way, on the way. And that Aikido is that expression of being the Tao in movement. And that essentially looking for harmony within the mixing of two energies is fundamentally a very important aspect of the Taoist perspective. Now, Taoists and Shintoists also both share this sense of transformational nature, in the sense that Taoists are looking for also kind of an alchemy of growth, transformational growth, as they approach this, allowing for these two energies to come together and to create a deeper harmony of life. Shinto as well has that aspect of alchemy as part of their philosophical context, in that the world was created by Izanami and Izanagi, a brother and sister god who came together and created the world through their union. Through the mixing of energies, fire and water, Shinto has also this theme of alchemy, just as Taoists also have this theme of alchemy. So alchemy is a very important aspect of Aikido, the philosophy of Aikido, and is contained both in the Shinto perspective and in the Taoist perspective. But the Taoists definitely, I think, have a different sense of what they're looking for in the nature of meeting the world and including all the different energies in the world, and recognizing that they are all included. There's nothing to be excluded. And that by bringing a greater inclusivity and moving towards an embracing of the yin and the yang of our lives, in Japanese, the yin of the yo of our lives, we find a way where we can be in harmony with the movement of life. And that's a very strong aspect of Aikido culture. And so if you're interested in that, I would suggest reading more, and the Tao Te Ching would be probably the best text you could use as a way to get more informed about the nature of Taoism. The last pillar, which would be Buddhism, is also something that's fundamentally very, very deeply set, overtly so, in Japanese culture, but originated from India, moving into China, and deeply stratified in China for quite some time. But in Japan, the two major branches of Buddhism that impacted Aikido was Shingon Buddhism, and the other was Zen Buddhism. Now, Shingon Buddhism is a expression of what's known as the Vajrayana path of Buddhism, which is it's transformative, it's tantric, it's esoteric in the sense that it is meant to transform and bring down the enlightened perspective into the body and transform the human being at the actual physical nature of the human being. And Zen Buddhism was about the realization of enlightenment and less of the tantric nature, but a deep realization of emptiness and the emptiness of all things, and the realization of the unity of all things, and that emptiness and form are fundamentally not separate. So the first Zen patriarch, who happens to be also the father of all Chinese and Japanese martial arts, the Bodhidharma, who started the Shaolin Temple, he's considered to be the first Zen patriarch. And Zen is very essentially a meditative approach, a directly independent meditative approach, and very accessible by the general public. Now, Zen wasn't, from my understanding, O-sensei didn't practice Zen. If he did, it wasn't a large theme of his life, but he was very drawn at an early age into the practice of Shingon Buddhism. And the Shingon Buddhism has this esoteric nature to it, a lot of ritual, a lot of mantra. In fact, Shingon means mantra, chanting, and the desire and the aim of not only accessing that enlightened perspective, but using that enlightened perspective to transform the body into a divine nature, similar to that Shinto and Taoist transformational nature of their practices as well. Now, Shingon Buddhism primarily connects with there are many different Buddhist gods and Buddhist deities, and with the practice of transformative Buddhism, you're looking at literally trying to embody the Buddhist nature or the energies of Buddha in your body. And the primary deity that was often focused on, in fact, there was a temple to him near the dojo in Iwama that we would often go visit, next to a waterfall. And it was a Shingon temple that was still also had Shinto aspect to it, in the sense that in Japan, for a period of time, Shintoism and Buddhism were connected. They were practiced together, and they weren't seen as being separate. Then later on, there was a movement to separate them as Shintoism was resurging, in an attempt to recognize Shinto as being a Japanese perspective, and Buddhism was considered foreign. They separated the two. But there was a small temple near Iwama that was devoted to this one particular Buddhist god named Fudo-myo. And Fudo-myo is oftentimes the central figure in many martial arts spiritual practices, specifically in Japan. And Fudo-myo is a fierce aspect, a fierce vision of the divine nature of Buddha, in the sense that it protects the practitioner from falling into fear, falling into doubt, falling into darkness, and provides a certain kind of ferocity in facing those things which hold us back from becoming enlightened or becoming transformed into a greater divine nature. So this particular aspect, Fudo-myo, was part of O-sensei's teacher's inspiration, Takeda, Sokaku Takeda, he was aligned with this particular Buddhist deity, Fudomyo. But I think O-sensei also connected with that in the form of the Dragon King. And there's a lot of things that go along with that. But I don't want to go too deeply into all of these things. But primarily, in the world of Buddhism, there's Zen, which is still strongly influenced Aikido, and Shingon Buddhism, which strongly influenced O-sensei and thereby influenced the practices of Aikido. And Buddhism in its nature is just the transcendence of our the realization that we are more than our desires, we are more than our fears, we are more than those instincts and those appetites that drive us, and that to go beyond that and to see that life is fundamentally framed in desire and suffering, and moving into a perspective that transcends the human suffering and the trap of being overly attached to our desires and overly intimidated by our fears, and being stuck on the wheel of our karmic existence is the general understanding of Buddhist thought. So Buddhism is fundamentally a transcendent practice, an attempt to go beyond our small human frail identity and understand the nature of Buddha, the nature of being awakened. And that type of enlightened perspective is one of recognizing the emptiness of our existence. And Shingon Buddhism takes that step of emptiness and then brings it back down into our lives and transforms our lives into something of deep harmony, a deep enlightened perspective. Shingon Buddhism has strong connections, strong parallels with Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism. And they both have a very similar esoteric approach and similar perspectives that meant to transform human life and human culture into something enlightened. Now, the word enlightenment is in a way kind of unique to the form of Buddhism, and I think it's shared to a certain degree in the practice of Taoism, where in Shintoism, it was a movement towards becoming divine, more like a god. And Confucianism, it was more about bringing our world into a state of harmony, into a perfect expression of a society that is in balance with itself. They all, in a way, have strong interconnective ties with each other, but they're not necessarily the same practice. And many practitioners of Zen Buddhism who engage in the practice of Aikido can be if they're really focused on that Zen perspective, will deeply experience Aikido as being, in a way, moving Zen. And where there's a sense of of having a transcendent experience in conflict, not being touched by the aggression of the other, not being drawn in to the conflict, but being, in a way, above the conflict and allowing the body and our experience to be framed in an enlightened perspective. Where Taoists would be looking for the harmony that can be experienced in the relationship, and Shintoists maybe reaching for the divine nature in the relationship and going through a process of misogi, and Confucian theory looking for the harmony of the training relationship and engaging in community and the nature of dojo community as being the fundamental ground of how we relate to each other in a state of harmony. All of these four perspectives are unique and yet overlap quite deeply. Each of them has a realization nature to it, in the sense of understanding what the perspective is about. And each of them, to a certain degree, have a transformational nature to it, in the sense that they're meant to bring a person to a greater experience of themselves. So I know that I'm introducing a lot, and I don't mean to overwhelm everybody with a lot of information, but I would hope that clarifies a little bit of the flavor of what we can experience in Aikido practice, Aikido culture, and the actual experience of practicing the art itself. So with that being said, I would like to kind of give the opportunity for people to ask questions, maybe just 2 or 3 questions, before we have a few minutes before we finish up tonight's call. But if you have a question concerning anything I've said, or another perspective that you would like to offer, be happy to hear from you. And if you know how to raise your hand electronically, you can do that. Or you can just kind of wave to me and I'll okay, Carl. Oh, sorry, Carl. Carl, you there? There you are.
There we go.
Okay.
Hey, Patrick, that was a good job getting all that into 40 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. As a gaijin no gaijin,
Yeah.
I have a different background, of course, being here in left coast of the U.S.
Yeah.
And just hearing you talk about Confucianism, I was wondering if you ever heard O Sensei have an opinion on communism.
No, I haven't. I think there was an attempt, to create when he was with his teacher Deguchi, that visit where they went and attempted to create a new Shambhala in Mongolia. I think that, to a large extent, probably contained within it a kind of an idea of structure to what that would look like. And I suspect that was probably, heavily influenced along those lines of a social structure that was based on harmony. And in Japan, this is really essential. It's in the fabric of almost everything that's done, not just only in dojos, but in corporations and family. And everything is set in that sense that everybody knows who they are and where they belong, and how to respond to seniors, how to respond to juniors, how to respond to different people in different situations, all based on this idea that there's a proper way to do things and a harmonious way to do things. And that was, coming from an egalitarian society like ours, and the first time coming to Japan, that was a real, like, wow, that doesn't make sense. But after a while, there is a kind of a beauty to that. And I think that, there's limitations to that hierarchy, obviously, but there is a beauty to that as well. But I have not read O Sensei's perspective on Confucianism directly, but I do believe that that was a very important part of his makeup. At the same time, he was also a rebel too. If he had been strictly followed that hierarchy to the nth degree, he would have never left his teacher Takeda. He would have never left his teacher Deguchi. He would have never been a rebel innovator, because that would have been contrary to that kind of understanding. So I think he he appreciated it, but I don't think he was he wasn't a blind follower of it. I'm sure in a way he transcended it too. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, and very much so. And what I hear listening to you talk about O Sensei is that our job as students then becomes transcend and include all of these.
Yes, it does.
make our own path and develop. Well, you're big on the evolution of Aikido.
Yeah.
So I'm saying evolution of our own spirits,
Yes.
basically, you know, well, it go on and on and on.
But what
I'll
you're
shut up and
pointing
let
to,
somebody
what you're
else have their
pointing to
turn.
is that I think that realization of self-responsibility, of being responsible for your own
Yeah.
training and no longer following anybody else. And that's what O-sensei was. He was not a follower. He studied with many teachers, but he was truly independent. And I think as Aikidoka, if we're going to really embody that, we have to take responsibility for our own evolution. And that's really great.
I think I'm about to crash.
All right. Anyway,
My
thank you, Carl,
bandwidth is
for
not-
sharing that. Anybody else would like to ask a question or offer something?
Yes, can I?
Yeah, Andrew, please.
Yes, Dawn and I are sitting here. Again, my apologies for the camera not working, but Dawn and I are both here.
Hello, Don.
I wanted to ask you, in terms of these transformative practices of O-sensei, a lot of dojos that we see here, if you mention chanting, it's like you've got 10 heads. And I wanted to ask you more specifically, as we know, O-sensei followed a very ritual kototama style chanting. And with my background with you, we also explored a lot of the Sanskrit yogic style chanting as well. And I was wondering if you had anything to say in terms of the importance of chanting, referencing these 4 qualities that you were talking about and our Aikido practice.
Well, I think, you know, the Shinto practice has a strong, as you mentioned, and I was mentioning, Kotodama is a strong part of that, and chanting is a very strong part of the Shinto practice, as in Buddhism and Shingon specifically. Even Zen, chanting the Heart Sutra is a part of the practice. But I'm not suggesting that we should go and study Shingon Buddhism or Zen Buddhism or Shintoism in order to access these principles, but that they're part of that they have influenced the Aikido. And chanting in and of itself, just coming down to the core sounds, the core fundamental sounds of Kotodama, which are su, wo, a, e, and accessing them and being able to play with them and feel them can be really beneficial to the practice. But, you know, whether or not you're going to become a Zen Buddhist or you know, try to follow some esoteric or contemplative practice, I think in the end, it's essential for an Aikidoka to contemplate, who am I, what am I doing, and why? And these are the essential questions of all spiritual practice. And if you just bring yourself to a greater fundamental sober reflection on, and really go deep on the expression of who am I and why am I here, you know, and what am I doing, just the fundamental basic questions, and you start to connect with those essential forces that drive you, the intelligence of the body, the intelligence of our emotional centers, our heart, our cognitive intelligence, and how we become more congruent and coherent with ourselves. The voice is a big part of our expression. How we express ourselves and how we experience that expression will become part of that contemplative exploration. And so, and working with consciousness, working with the experience of consciousness in the body, working with the intelligence of the body, engaging also with the source of inspiration and love that come from within us. It's not something that comes from without us. All of these things are fundamentally, essentially already part and parcel of our human experience. And so Aikido, for me, is about, is essential that we digest, or to a certain extent, have a direct relationship with these energies within us, and not necessarily ignoring them, and not necessarily listening to somebody else's take on them, but to having a direct personal relationship with the sense of who I am, with the sense of why I'm here, and the sense of how I express this understanding in my life through my Aikido, and how does that Aikido support that contemplative exploration, and how that transform who I am as a person. Not just in the way I act, but literally how I am in my body, how I feel my environment, how I touch other people, how I energetically am in the room, and how I connect not only with, in a sense, with myself, but with nature. If we looked at Shinto, Shinto would be a direct relationship between man and the divine nature of God, the divine nature of all nature, the divine nature of our world. It's myself and my relationship to the sky, to the mountains, to the ocean, to the rivers, to the trees. If we look at Shintoism, it's the relationship between the two sides, between myself, my light nature, my dark nature, my high nature, my low nature, my frame and my flow, my creative, my receptive, the yin and yang of me, and the yin and yang of us in relationship. It's the whole sense of feeling the polarity of life and bringing a place where I can embrace both poles. And Zen and Buddhism is literally, okay, myself in relationship to the totality of all human experience, where I transcend that, the question of human suffering and the question of the human story, literally my relationship to my egoic identity. And Confucianism is that relationship to our social network, to our society. How do I relate it to everyone in my town, in my family, in my dojo? How do I find my place where I'm at ease and I'm at peace and in harmony with the whole thing? I don't know, I got off on a way off tangent and I didn't necessarily respond to your comment, Andrew, but I hope that kind of responded to it. Did you want to add something else? I'm sorry for going a little bit farther.
No, that was great. It's a wonderful summary. Yeah, no, it was just the question of chanting and connection, and you very clearly related that back to the 4 topics that you spoke about earlier. So thank you very much for that.
You know, and I think because people will feel to a certain extent, oh shit, I don't know any of this tradition. What am I going to do? And so then they pick up a book or they try to copy somebody. But if you just actually, all chanting comes from, I had a beautiful explanation of what the chant Om was. Om is the sound of ah, u, and and that ah is the first sound you make when, as a human being, if you just press on your belly and you open your mouth, ah, that's what comes out. And is the last sound you make as a human being. So you take the first sound, ah, and you add the last sound, and you put a continuing sound, woo, you have ao, om, which is the fundamental chant, not only in Indian Sanskrit, but in that basically goes through Tibetan Buddhism and all the way into Japan. And it's basically the circle of life, birth, life, and death, represented in one chant. But you don't even need to necessarily follow that. Who doesn't feel better when they're in pain? If you've ever been in pain, either emotional pain or physical pain, as a child, Don't you remember going, ah? I did. And it just felt better. It relieved the pressure of the suffering. What is that? That's chanting. And that simple chanting is part of our human experience. You don't need to follow a tradition. You can actually just connect with that life force within you and give it voice. And if you do that, I think it has an impact on our experience. Tremendously. So thank you for the question, Andrew.
Oh, thank you very much.
All right, let's have space for one more, and then we'll finish it off for the evening. So if there's anybody else who'd like to raise their hand or ask a question or offer a comment, you're more than welcome to do so. No? Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone's presence this evening and your willingness to kind of have an introduction on what I refer to, and I'm sure that there'll be people that may have different perspectives on this. And again, I'm not an expert on these traditions, but I've tasted them deeply, and they were part of the culture and part of the experience of living in Japan, and part of every dojo that I've encountered. Some dojos much more, in a way, based on the hierarchy and the social structure, some very strongly influenced by Zen, some very strongly influenced by Shinto practice and the misogi and the engagement of what's known as a tanren, kind of strengthening through fire. Some like very Taoist and very alchemic in the way they work with energies and the embracing of the human experience and feeling the polarity in the practice and the flow and the sense of freedom in that. And I think not to necessarily try to over-define it, but grow into your own understanding of these qualities, and notice how sometimes certain teachers or certain dojo communities may gravitate towards one versus the other. And it doesn't necessarily mean that anything is wrong or anything is out of balance, but there's generally a tendency that the teachers have towards being more at home in one context than the other. But in my experience, all four have a deeply strong influence on the practice of Aikido, and being more in tune with them, or at least aware of them, can be very helpful in understanding our practice and getting a deeper feeling for what we're doing. So with that being said, I just want to say thank you. It's really wonderful to see everybody. Great to see Thorsten and Joseph and Hydran and Piero. It's nice that you were able to join us. And Andrew coming in and all the way from Canada, Carl from the West Coast of the United States. So, and everybody locally, Noel, Paolo. And so thank you guys for just spending an evening talking about and sharing a little bit of the nature of the different perspectives of different philosophical perspectives that influence this art that we're all practicing. Okay, all right. Have a great night, and we see you again soon, I hope.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. See you soon.
Bye.